Gleba Survival Guide Crash Course. This is definitely the trickiest of the first 3 planets after Novice. There are a lot of things on this planet that can trip you up and send you into downward spirals. So without further ado, here we go. First thing, when you land, look for the white spots on the map. That's where the trees are that you're actually going to turn in your orchards. They both show up as white. We have the iron trees, the jelly stem over here, and the copper trees, the Yamako trees over here. When you first actually land and you need your initial copper and iron, it will be these small little like formations in the swamps. So you'll have the gray one for iron in the red area, and you will have the copper colored one in the green area right over here, like these. That's how you get your initial iron and copper. Okay, so that takes us to the first actual major tip. These agriculture towers, when you set them up, will harvest everything and throw it all onto the belt. They will completely deplete your orchards, and they need seeds to replant. In order to get seeds, you need to process them. Which means if you harvest stuff that you are not processing, you will not get the seeds back. So if you over-harvest before your processing is ready, what will happen is you will run out of seeds, your orchards will be depleted, and you will be like, oh shit, I now have to go wandering to the small ones to try to replenish things, and it's just garbage. I went through that once, and I wound up just loading an earlier save because actually dealing with that was, ridiculous. And I set it up properly the second time. We've got circuit conditions set up here in order to manage that. This is a lot scarier than it looks. We just have to read the belt in multiple places because we have the splitters essentially divide the belts. But this is all one big green circuit network, and it's all set up to these inserters, which are simply set to pull the Yamako out if it's less than my Y signal. I have a little control console on my main base that lets me adjust all those values globally easily. We'll cover that more later in the video. So on to point number 2, the seeds. So as I said, the seeds are everything. You need them to replant. You also need them to expand the farming area because normally you won't be able to build out like this. This brown that you can see here in the middle of the green, this is the artificial landfill that I put here in order to expand the area. It's pretty limited in how it can be placed. There's 2 kinds. A basic kind, which can only be placed in the... whoops, not that button. Which can only be placed in like this lighter green area, and then an advanced kind, which can be placed in more areas. That being said, this is already complete overkill for the size of my base, but I had major seed issues, as I said, on my first... when I first tried this, and I wound up just going completely in the other direction because I just did not want to run out of seeds. And that leaves us right now with tons of seeds. Pretty sure these are completely full. Yep, so we have all the seeds to do what we want with, which allows us to make plenty of the landfill if we want, which requires tons of seeds and tons of nutrients. Seed management is everything. You want to treat it like Covarex a bit, where you want to set up a lot of seed production before you really dive into everything else. It's kind of like how you want to make sure you have a lot of U-235 and your Covarex is saturated before you really start building lots of nuclear reactors. Kind of the same principle here. Make sure you get a lot of seeds first. You will save yourself a lot of headache in the long run. Okay, so that brings us to point number 3, the nutrient and bioflux loop. This is the 3rd iteration of my Gleba bases. I have rebuilt this entire thing twice now. This is version number 3. And by rebuild, I mean literally Alt-D doing something like that, completely scrapping it and start over. I'm quite happy with this. This, I think, is one of the better layouts you can have. What we have is a simple nutrient and bioflux loop along the outside, and everything else is on the inside. Every biochamber requires nutrients to function, and there's a lot of things that also require bioflux, so this just makes things very nice and simple. Like the main stuff flows down the middle, the nutrients and other stuff go on the outside, and it's all very nicely contained and very efficiently set up with beacons. As far as rough ratios go, these were, again, somewhat rough. You want to have a lot of processing. You want to have a good amount of nutrient production. I actually only had the 1 nutrient production here. I wound up adding a second here, and they were still having trouble offloading, not you. They were still having trouble offloading the nutrients fast enough until I got stack inserters, but that was mainly a problem once we got to the pentapods. More on that in a second. But generally, you want to have your main products flowing in on one side, and then you want to have it all processed, do whatever you want with it, and then once it's done, it just goes, right now it's just going up here, it eventually spoils, and the bots manage that from there. Having a clean nutrient and bioflux management system will be the difference between whether you have a nightmare on this planet or you have a general good time. Once I had this all set up, like, things became much better, much cleaner, much smoother, and I was very happy with the result. I feel like a year from now or 6 months from now, I might have redesigned the majority of my other blueprints, but I have a feeling my Gleba core will still look something like this, with the nutrient and bioflux loop on the outside and everything else on the inside. Okay, tip number 4, what to burn for power. So if you're like me, you probably land on this planet, you probably had the idea of, like, okay, we harvest a bunch of stuff, we run it through the system, anything that's not used, you know, turns to spoilage and or gets burned, and that's where our power comes from. This is a trap. This is a trap because spoilage burns extremely quickly and doesn't give shit for power. Like, if we look at this, we can see as the bots put in spoilage, it's just almost instantly gone. It'll go through a stack of 200 spoilage in like 1 second. And you get 1 spoilage per thing that rots. So when you're burning spoilage, it's not for power, it's to get rid of it. That brings us to power. Rocket fuel from jelly is a recipe you want to set up relatively soon. And you want to have that funding these, because that will keep things going for much longer, and it'll be much more consistent. You actually want to have 2 separate sets of towers. You want to have one hooked up to your, you know, one doing your power, and then a second set that's literally just, you know, a waste tower for burning spoilage. You don't really want to overlap them. Like, this will avoid a good bit of headache. The ratios on this, these are basically equivalent to single-core nuclear reactors with 40 megawatts, except with no adjacency bonus. So a single heating tower to 4 heat exchangers to 7 turbines, and you're good to go. We are producing about 135 megawatts, which is enough for a complete beacon setup here. You know, we've got beacons up here too. I actually removed them here because these suck down an insane amount of power with the beacons and modules, and I simply didn't need that level of production for everything I was making here. But yeah, as you can see, we still got a good amount of foundries, EMPs, and it's also pretty easy to scale up. I probably overdid it a little bit on my rocket fuel plants here, but, you know, as I said, this whole thing isn't perfectly ratioed, and you know, overkill is better than underkill. It's better to have too much rocket fuel production and have them be, a couple of them be idle, than have too little and have some of them not working. These are all circuited up on the inserting inserters, so that if there's too much rocket fuel in the entire network, it checks the whole thing, it stops making rocket fuel. Okay, another thing about how you set up your buildings here, when it comes to the iron and copper bacteria, there are 2 different recipes. There is the cultivation recipe, which takes a little iron bacteria and bioflux, and the production recipe, which takes jelly and turns it into a lot of spoilage with a very small chance for iron bacteria. As you can see, this is really, really garbage for producing iron bacteria, so you just want a couple of these. Honestly, one of them would have been fine, but I was doing everything in pairs. And these will produce a little bit of iron bacteria if these belts run short on iron bacteria. Like, we have a belt reader hooked up here, you know, read all belts, and if it actually gets low, it puts more. That way, these always have access to iron bacteria, because if you need more copper and iron and copper, what you need to do is increase the amount of your cultivators, and then increase your bioflux production. You do not increase these are terrible. And you should definitely have them circuited so they're not just, you know, burning through shit for the hell of it. You know, because as I said, the majority of it's going to come from here. Okay, tip number 5. Nutrient consumption of pentapod eggs and turrets. The nutrient consumption of pentapod eggs is actually insane. This is 30 nutrients per 15 seconds or whatnot. These just take, you know, the eggs and the bioflux. But these, once you set up your pentapod eggs, this will just eat through your nutrients. So make sure you have enough nutrients. Not having enough nutrients is one of the ways you can death spiral. There are basically 3 ways you can death spiral this planet. Number 1, running out of seeds. Everything will crash eventually. Number 2, running out of nutrients. Everything will crash, and much more quickly than not having seeds. And you might have to do some shenanigans in order to get it jump started again. So never run out of nutrients, never run out of seeds. And the third one is the one I already covered, running out of power. Like, if you don't have a consistent source of power, like if you're burning stuff and you're not making enough, you know, obviously, but, you know, that's kind of true on every planet. The difference is running out of power is a lot more catastrophic on this planet, because running out of power can mean running out of nutrients, and yeah. Like on most other planets, you run out of power, you just have to, you know, hook the power back up and you're good to go. On this planet, you run out of power or seeds or something like that, you run out of nutrients, everything just stops working, shuts down. You have to reseed the entire thing with nutrients. It's, yeah, you don't want to deal with it. These are this is a very momentum-based planet. Everything wants to keep moving all the time. It's kind of a lot like Fulgora in that sense. Like the way we've got set up Fulgora here is, you know, everything's always flowing, constantly flowing. Anything not used gets trashed in the recyclers down here. But it's always constantly flowing. Same principle here. Everything constantly flowing. Okay, so those are the 5 major tips I got. Now I want to go over a bit more about my specific setup, specifically the circuitry I have here. So there's a fair number of circuits here. It's not as scary as it might seem if you're a little afraid of circuits or something, but we have 5 different signals here. We have A and B. This is how many agricultural science packs I want this to produce at a time. Which is 2,000. We have signal B, which is the amount of bioflux that I put on the belt. N, which is the number of nutrients on the belt. J, which is the jelly rate of production. And Y, which is the Yamako. Those I showed a little bit at the start of the vid. Those relate to these inserters with the Y and the J. So I can just adjust those values to increase my harvesting, to prevent over-harvesting, and cutting down more than I can actually process. So all of those are hooked up to the things that are relevant to them. You already saw Y and J. The N is simply hooked up with the nutrients, which also hooks up to the belt, which reads the belt. Same with the bioflux readers. They're hooked up to the same sensor. And, yeah, the agriculture, again, pretty similar idea. It's reading... I think I actually might have broken that connection at some point because it's not really hooked up to the box anymore, but you get the idea. It's supposed to be hooked up to this to mean that once we have enough agricultural science, you know, it stops producing, but the way agricultural science works, you're probably just going to keep that going all the time anyway. As far as the rest of it goes, we have our carbon setup up here. We have the burnt carbon up here, which goes into the carbon fiber. The burnt spoilage, sorry. The entire spoilage system is managed with the chests. The 2 things that are managed with the bots in this setup are spoilage and seeds. Everything else is essentially belt-based, and you can see the belts which circulate them. We have a fair amount of spoilage chests for here. You want to make sure you have these on almost every single one. I think the only ones that don't actually need it are the ones that can, you know, use spoilage as a fuel, but even they can back up sometimes, so it's something you want to keep an eye on. I mean, sorry, use spoilage as an ingredient. With this many, even with everything, with every seed and every spoilage being managed by bots, we're using less than 100 bots right now. Only about 60 of them are active, and part of the reason it's that many is because I have this down here, which is hooked up to a belt and not even hooked up to anything anymore. That's because I moved this belt to come up here to produce stack inserters, and honestly, that stack should be moved up here because it would drastically reduce bot time. I think that more or less covers everything. Last few things, you want to have turrets around your pentapod area just in case there's a containment breach. Haven't really had any issues with containment breach, and as I said, if you keep the momentum going, like if we don't limit the agricultural science, and it's always just constantly going, and any excess just is left to spoil, then you should never really have a breach. I haven't had a single, like, actual breach. I've only had issues when I was changing the setup around, and, you know, eggs were just sitting idle, and that's when I preemptively set it up. But yeah, we have actually been more or less containment breach free. We are also recycling nutrients up here from spoilage. This, whether you want this or not, kind of depends on your spoilage. You know, you actually need spoilage for some recipes. So if you find yourself not having enough spoilage for the burnt stuff or something like that, then you may want to get rid of that. And that, I think that covers everything. hopefully you guys have a smooth time on Gleba. Hopefully these tips help you out. My name is Stupid Fat Hobbit, and I stream at Twitch TV, SF Hobbit. And thanks for watching.